Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. I am Eboni Nelson, and I have the honor of serving as Dean of the University of Connecticut School of Law. On behalf of our students, staff professionals, faculty, and alumni, I welcome all of you, including those of you joining us virtually, to this evening's Centennial event celebrating Dean's impact at UConn School of Law. I extend a special welcome to our distinguished guests, Board of Trustees member Sherry Cantor, members of the Judiciary, Law School Alumni Association board members, and our distinguished speaker and panelists, Professor Kent Newmyer, and former UConn Law Deans Nell Jessup Newton, Jeremy Paul, and Tim Fisher. As I'm sure Nell, Jeremy, and Tim would attest to, successfully leading an institution as wonderful as UConn School of Law would not be possible without the unwavering support and sacrifice of our spouses, partners, friends, and loved ones. I ask you to join me in acknowledging and thanking three special guests who are with us this evening. First, Ms. Nancy Rankin, widow of Dean Hugh Mcgill. Thank you so much for being with us, Nancy. And Dina Fisher, wife of Dean Tim Fisher. Thank you so much for being with us. And joining us virtually, Laurel Leff, wife of Dean Jeremy Paul. Thank you so much for joining us virtually, Laurel. I heard someone say that this is like a family reunion, and it definitely feels that way for me, even though I'm somewhat new to the UConn Law family. And so I really want to thank all of you for joining us for this special event. As we continue our year-long celebration of our centennial, marking a century of progress, excellence, and impact at UConn School of Law, I'm honored to introduce Professor Kent Newmyer, Professor of Law and History Emeritus, who will provide remarks about the history of the law school and some of the transformative leaders and moments. Professor Newmyer has been a professor of law and history at UConn School of Law since 1997. For 37 years prior, he was a professor of history at UConn and taught a wide range of graduate and undergraduate courses in American history, specializing in the political, constitutional, and legal history of the early national period. In 1988, Professor Newmyer was named a Distinguished Alumni Professor for excellence in teaching and scholarship, the highest faculty honor bestowed by the University of Connecticut at that time. He has published numerous books and articles and has served as a contributor and commentator on the U.S. Supreme Court and several other topics for several media outlets. Professor Newmyer received his PhD in history from the University of Nebraska in 1959. Please join me in welcoming Professor Newmyer.
Dean Nelson, thank you. Nell, thank you for that gracious introduction. You know, I'm kind of overwhelmed to be in such distinguished company. You know, when this announcement first came out, I saw my picture near these guys. I thought I had gotten a battlefield promotion. Well, let me make a few remarks, sort of personal and sort of historical. Let me start out by saying something about Hugh Mcgill. You know, many qualities that go into making a great dean, and Hugh had them all, but one comes to mind especially. And I'm going back maybe 6 years. I mean, Hugh's passed the crown on to, I guess, maybe Jeremy at that time, but he was just a mere professor. But he and I had been teaching a course together on legal history, and we were teaching over Knight Hall. And it was a November evening, something like this. But I remember the sun was just going down. I remember the lights in Star Hall were on. And so Hugh and I were heading back to Hosmer Hall, and we got back right in front of the library. And all of a sudden, Hugh just stopped. And he just stood there for the longest minute. I don't know, I guess he was listening to the silence, I guess you might say. He was just looking at the beauty of the place. And it occurred to me that that quality of being a great dean was the fact that he just loved the place. I mean, it was his baby, it was his obligation, it was his pride and joy. You know, that same sort of, affection, love, was also true of Philip Blumberg. And of course, Philip passed the torch on to Hugh. And, you know, both of those guys depended on the work and contributions of people going back to the founding of this place. So tonight I thought I'd say just a few words about the founding, single out some heroes maybe, and try to identify what you might call the kind of institutional transformation of the place that I think defined the office and the responsibilities of the dean. So let me start at the beginning, that is to say 1921, October, George Lillard and George's wife, Caroline, both of them was the founding father and the founding mother because they were really both in it together. But you know, when you look at George Lillard, he did not look like he was going to be a founding father. I mean, he had a law degree from Georgetown, to be sure, but he had never taught a course, so far as I know, in legal history. He certainly had never founded a law school. What he was doing at that time in 1921, he was in the claims division of Travelers Insurance Company. And what he discovered was that the burgeoning insurance industry in Hartford needed more lawyers. So he had this inspiration, and he had connections as well, you know, leaders in the community and so on, who was able to mobilize a kind of legal strike force. And they set up a school. I mean, actually, it wasn't much of a school to start with. It was just a series of night courses. It was a sort of storefront school because it didn't have any permanent location. They shifted from one place to another in downtown Hartford, but they had some of the most dedicated teachers that you could ever imagine. So what I would like to do is not to take you through all the details of this history, but just to touch on some of the points, because it was a sort of miraculous transformation from a few night classes into the Hartford College of Law, as it was called. And so what do you see? I mean, the first class graduated in 1924. There were 6 people in it. And by the way, one of them was a woman, which put the school 25 years ahead of Harvard on that point. So when you move into the 1930s, all sorts of stuff starts to happen. 1931, you find all of a sudden there's a board of trustees, and George Lillard transferred all of the assets of his, it was sort of a proprietary law school, to the board of trustees. That's a major shift, and the president of the board of trustees was a lawyer named William Brosmith, who was one of the leading insurance lawyers in the country at that time. And I have a feeling Brosmith's influence helped to propel the school forward. So if you look at the 1930s, all sorts of stuff begins to happen. Hey, 1933, you get a dean. I mean, it wasn't a dean like the modern deans, but still that's a statement. There was another ambitious thing that happened. In 1932, Roscoe Pound, who's the big enchilada, mind you, in the legal world, former dean at Harvard Law School. You know, he had a bibliography longer than Cotton Mather's. All of a sudden, he's delivering the commencement address. I'm trying to think, this guy, he's got to be talking to maybe 25 people. But it's a sign that something's happening. So if you look at the years before 1935, I mean, hey, you have the first full-time dean, for example, in 1933. It was 1935, I think, that was really kind of a transformative year. Because in that year, I mean, the Hartford College of Law was legally recognized. And it was in 1935 that the law school for the first time offers day courses. Up to that time, it had been, leading lawyers in the Hartford area teaching night school, largely just to students who were, working in the insurance industry, as it seems. So in 1935, you have a shift to a sort of major educational institution. And for the first time, we have a full-time law professor. And that law professor was William Starr, whose hall we're sitting in right now. So, by the end of that decade, I think you could talk meaningfully about a Hartford College of Law actually being a college. There were three full-time professors, a day course, a full-time librarian. By the way, in 1940, the full-time librarian was Lillian Lillard, George's wife. So if you fast forward up to 1940, things look beautiful. There were students. In fact, there were too many students, and so many for that matter that you had to get a new place to locate and teach. They got, the Board of Trustees got this beautiful mansion in 39 Woodland. It belonged to the former dean, I think, of the seminary, but it was a beautiful place. And one of the professors said, one of the guys who was teaching said, "Now the days of struggle are over." It was a quote from him. He thought, man, here we are. We got this beautiful location. We got students. We got a full-time staff. And we're beginning to look like a real school. And in fact, they were. There were 219 graduates from 1930 to 1942. 219 graduated. And in that group, there were two presidents of insurance companies, one chief justice of the Connecticut Supreme Court, numerous other people in the state judiciary system, and of course, dozens of lawyers spreading out across Connecticut doing law, making law work for ordinary people. It was looking really good. Then came December 7th, and 4 years of the Second World War, and the place almost tanked. Former students left, went off to war. Some of the people that were teaching, joined up. By the end of the war, there were 27 people in the school. The graduating class in 1946 had 6 people. Actually, that's the same number that graduated in 1924. So, it looked like the end of the line. And John North, who was a chair of the Board of Trustees, as a matter of fact, what he added up, he said, "We can't pay the bills. We can't even turn on the lights." And to quote him, he said, "It's a nightmare." And then there was a miraculous or inspirational development that changed everything about the school and about the deanship, too. And this happened in 1943. And it happened because of the vision of an acting dean by the name of Lawrence Ackerman. Ackerman was a force to reckon with, you understand. He was the dean of the School of Business down at Storrs. He was just acting dean of the law school because he had to fill in and take care of that. He had a law degree from Columbia. He had taught insurance law. He was basically a deeply cultured man. And there's a picture of Ackerman in the Dodd archives down at the Yukon. There's got this big sign right out in front of his desk in bold letters. And you know what it said? Think. Anyhow, he was thinking. So he and North happened to be in 1943. They happened to be going to an insurance conference in New York City. They're riding the train. And Ackerman, I don't know whether it's some sort of divine vision he had or maybe just an accident, he said to North, he said, "John, you should consider having the University of Connecticut assume control over the Hartford College of Law." And North, apparently in an offhanded way, said, "Yeah, I'll think about it." 3 weeks later, Ackerman got this call from North. North had talked to the Board of Trustees, and they agreed. And so these negotiations began. And I mean, they were high-level negotiations with the leaders in Hartford and so on, political forces at B, civic leaders. There was a decision that went down. Ackerman was sort of representing the University of Connecticut. He was a great pal of Albert Jorgensen, who was president at that time. So they worked out this deal that the university would assume control of the Hartford College of Law for 5 years, and that the college would remain in Hartford. Well, it turned out that that would be a permanent arrangement, and it was made permanent in 1948. But the consequences of that deal were twofold, were immense. Because the University of Connecticut then sort of paid the electric bills, you know, during the war until the students could come back. And they came back in great force. People had gone off to war, came back. They were eager to learn some law, and of course there were a couple of great professors waiting to teach them. So things looked good. I mean, as a matter of fact, the first consequence of this transformation was a golden age of teaching, really. At 39 Woodland, you had a body of students that were hungry to learn some law. You had two great teachers, Ed Stevenson and Starr himself. And so it was a sort of golden age. But the consequences of this transfer were just beginning to be played out. And it altered the whole structure of the school and the office of the dean, because from here on out, the law school was answerable to other political forces, answerable to the University of Connecticut, which was answerable to, you know, the people in the state legislature. All of a sudden, it was sort of a new dynamic, and the deans who would take charge of the university hereafter would have to deal with a whole set of forces over which they really didn't have any control. Well, let me just move forward to the person I think was the first modern dean. Howard Sachs is, to my mind, a sort of unsung hero in all of this. Here's what happened. I mean, so the university now sort of owns the law school. In 1962, John Dempsey appointed Homer Babbage Jr. as president of the university, 1962. And Dempsey said to Homer, make this school a national research institution. Hey, I was at that school in 1960, and I tell you, it had a long way to go from that. So that's Homer's under the gun. And what Homer decides is, in order to do that, we needed to do two things, kind of flagship operations. One was a medical school, and the other one was a law school. So we're getting down to the modern age now. So in 1967, Babbage, in order to get the law school moving, appoints Howard Sachs dean. And Howard Sachs, and you know, Homer was under the gun to make the university modern. Now Howard is under the gun to make the law school modern. Well, he starts to do that with considerable success. But the problem was, when he was modernizing, there were a lot of people on the faculty who didn't want to be modern. You know, they were doing a good job, doing a brilliant job, but they were teaching state law. And so if you're going to be a national law school, you got to broaden out. And also you're getting more people on board. You know, new professors come in and they want to teach their own course, and they're reflecting things that are happening in the legal profession. I mean, it's pretty chaotic, the situation that Howard inherited. And then the crucial thing was the anti-war protest in 1970 and 71. And you folks are probably familiar with that. But what happened was the University of Connecticut criminal clinic decided to represent the war protesters. And Howard Sachs, of course, was a national leader in the clinic movement, so he favored this. And the guy who headed the clinic was a guy by the name of Joe Harbaugh, who in my mind is another great hero. I mean, a ferocious litigator, you might say. And he wanted to educate his students, and what better way to have them represent the war protesters. And they did it brilliantly. Took it right up to the Second Circuit Court level and won some big victories. But you know, some people in the state of Connecticut didn't like that at all. I mean, hey, their sons were over there fighting in Vietnam, and you're going to defend somebody who's flying the Viet Cong flag or desecrating the American flag. So, while American Bar Association, by the way, approved of what the clinic was doing, but Governor Meskell didn't approve, the legislature didn't approve, people in Connecticut didn't approve, Homer Babbage didn't approve. Homer was under the gun to straighten out things down there because there was a big, radical movement down there. So Meskell tells Homer to straighten up down there. Homer tells Howard to clean up his act. So this is Howard. He's got a divided faculty. The legal community in Connecticut doesn't like what's happening. They think that Howard is not taking control of the law school. The people are disappointed. Meskell's threatening to defund the clinic and cut funds for the law school. So, hey, long, short story. Something had to give. Somebody had to go. Somebody had to take the fall. And Howard took the fall. Howard was invited to lunch with Homer Babbage and Ed Gant, which, by the way, is a formidable pair of people. And I guess they were going to chow down at the Hartford Club or some fancy place. But apparently before the hors d'oeuvres arrived, Homer said this. And if anybody knew Homer, you could hear him saying it. He said, "Howard, what would you think about resigning?" So, I mean, that's the kind of question I would love to know, what he was thinking about. Well, I mean, Howard, good man that he was, noble Roman, fell on his sword. So my concluding thing is this. I think in looking at Howard's travail and his sad ending, you can see what the modern dean of the law school has to deal with. Hey, the job, it's easy, guys. I know you think it's hard, but it's easy. So it seems to me, looking in from the outside, all you have to do is to be everything to everybody all the time. So, first thing, you got to be a legal scholar. You got to know what's going on in the legal world. You got to deal with stores. You got to defend the law school in stores, which means you got to be a politician. You got to be a diplomat, psychologist, maybe. Then you got to deal with the legislature because they got the money, and you got to persuade them to give some of it to the law school. But in order to do that, you got to have the political community of the state behind you. And then, meantime, back in the ranch, you have the faculty, you have the students, you have the staff to placate, to champion, to inspire. So my concluding remarks is, why in the hell would anybody want to be a dean of the law school? Hey, so I'm sure these guys, we can't ask them why they became dean. That's too personal. But maybe they'll tell us something of the challenges, and I'm hoping too they'll say something about what it was to be a dean here at UConn. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kent. Can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kent, for that rich history. And if I could take moderator's privilege, if my guests don't mind, of course, these former deans have such wonderful histories and backgrounds and such great credentials that all of you can read about. And so while I did have the introduction, I want to start where Professor Newmeier left off. Why in the heck would one want to be dean? And so the first question that I have for our distinguished panelists is, well, what attracted you to the UConn Deanship. And if I may, since we want this to be a fireside chat without the fire, I will go with first names, if that's okay with everyone, instead of the title of Dean that you all have so richly deserved and earned. So I'll start with Nell. Nell, what attracted you to the UConn Law Deanship?
Well, let's see. Can everybody hear me okay? I was a dean at another law school. I was the first woman dean at this other law school. There were a lot of issues about my gender, and it wasn't a great, I thought I wanted to be a dean, but it was a very difficult place, and the president of the university kind of ruled with an iron fist. And then I had a group of law professors who I had taken aside and spoken to about some issues they had, were threatening to sue me for discriminating against older white European males. I don't know why they needed all those words together. And I was thinking, I think, I'm not sure this is working. It was my second year. I'm really not sure. I mean, now mind you, the junior faculty, they were all for me, but then the faculty went to war with each other, and it was a mess. And Avi Seufer, who's maybe only known to a few of you, called me. He was most recently the dean of Hawaii, but he had been here at one point in his career. He called me and he said, Connecticut is looking for a dean. It's a very sweet deanship. That's like the word. I'm going, what is a sweet deanship, Avi? And he explained it was the faculty, it was the staff, the students, everything. And I thought that was very nice. And then I had a very difficult meeting with my president, and I came home. I was so upset at this meeting with the president that I actually sheared the side mirror off of my car pulling into the garage because the dog was barking and the phone was ringing. And I pick up the phone. It was Paul Berman. And he said, Dean, I don't know if anybody's ever told you, but we have a very well-behaved faculty at UConn. So I said, I'm in. And that turned out to be true for me. It was a very sweet deanship, a wonderful, wonderful group of people. And I'm very glad I came. So that's my story.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nell, and thank you for blazing the trail. We'll talk about that in just a minute as the first female dean here of the law school. Next, Jeremy, what attracted you to the deanship?
I can't really relate to this question because it seems to me being dean of a law school is just a fantastic job. I decided very soon after I started teaching in Miami in the early 80s that I'd love to be a dean one day. I had ideas about legal education. I think I was a little hopeful that the dean position was a place to influence things, perhaps more than
Were those hopes dashed, Jeremy?
No, not at all. But by the time I became dean here, I had been Nell's associate dean for 5 years. I was also associate dean for research. I was Hugh's associate dean for a year. I enjoyed all those experiences. I loved the place. And, when you ask someone, why are you attracted to this? This is like the Ted Kennedy question, why do you want to be president? Nobody really cares about that. What they really want to know is, what are you going to do if you get there, right? Now, this is retrospective, but I had things I wanted to do. I wanted to diversify the faculty. We succeeded at that. I wanted to start a Washington program. We did that. And you have to, I knew I would like it because I'm a people person more than a books person, although nobody ever believes that about me, but nonetheless, it's true. So I knew I would like it, and I did. I thought it was a great opportunity, and we got a lot of things done. There were challenges, and I'm sure we'll talk about those in a minute. But I have this line about Philadelphia. We have graduates like almost everywhere, but hardly any in Philadelphia. I think people hide Philadelphia. They only want people from there. And I think the same thing is true about being a dean. It's a great job, but people always complain about it. But I never did. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Tim, what attracted you to the deanship coming from practice, unlike the others? Yes.
Sure. So the first thing I'd say is I want to pick up on Nell's comment about this being a really sweet deanship. That was a product of Hugh Mcgill, who had an amazing capacity to take a community and help them have a common understanding of who they were in a very positive sense. And that was something that remained true entirely through to the time that I came, and I think you've inherited it as well. It had so much to do with the culture of the faculty as a group of shared ideals. For me, as you mentioned, I'd been in the private sector for a few decades, and so I had much less of an idea what I was doing than any of the others here or any of our forebears. But what attracted me, first off, was the mission. My belief in the law as a way to make society better, to give us security and fairness in life, and the idea of being able to be a leader in that endeavor and also train the next generation that'll carry that about. The culture here is terrific. It was incredibly attractive to me. Such interesting, alive minds sharing ideas in a way that I just found tremendously exciting and continue to. And then the last was specific to me coming from private practice, which is that in private practice, you are supporting someone else's project, but you are not really building an organization that you can take pride in saying, I'm leaving it off better off than when I found it. And so the opportunity to come and take a position where I was leading an institution and try and move it forward so that when I finished, I could say to myself, yes, we got some things done. That was extremely attractive to me as well, and I'm tremendously grateful for the opportunity. And in that endeavor, I do have to give one other shout out, and that is to Claudia Hallis, who was my assistant through those years, who who made my life possible during the days, and for those of you who know the business terms, was also our chief compliance officer. The number of bad things I could have done, but for her, is tremendous. Thank you, Claudia.
Yes, I'd heard such wonderful things about you, Claudia. It's wonderful to have you with us this evening. And so many, whether it's faculty members, staff members, they protect us from ourselves. And so we definitely, that support that you all provide, incredibly, incredibly important. So thank you, and thank you for being here. Going back to you now, Nell, as the first female dean of the law school, what was that experience like for you? What do you think that meant for the law school then? What do you think it means for leadership in the law now?
Well, I think what struck me the most is I came from a place where it was just so obvious it was an issue to a place where it was not an issue at all. And I knew something about UConn before I came here. I knew Jeremy, I had met Hugh, I knew Avi, who used to be here, and I knew a fair amount about it. And I knew that, for instance, that one of the most powerful faculty members at UConn was a woman, Carol Weisbrot. I knew that Connecticut had had a woman governor. I knew that Ellen Ash Peters had been on the Supreme Court. Katie Rohrabaugh, who argued all these great cases, the women's rights cases. And I thought, well, this is a state that doesn't seem to be unduly threatened by women. So I never, ever, ever here noticed that it made any difference. The only time it made a difference was relatively early on when Bill Breitz, known to many of you, sought to see me with a small group of alumni. And they were acting, so they're in the dean's suite, they're sitting at that table. They're acting a little kind of weird. And I'm thinking, I wonder what this is about. And Bill's spokesperson, and Bill said, we have been discussing, Dean, we know that you are, we believe you're not married. We don't like to, ask too many questions. But, there are some events sometimes, like the governor's ball, where you might need an escort. A woman, or a guy. I guess I'd said, well, I actually, I happen to be straight, because he had said, you might, in case you might have a partner or something, where you might need a date. And so we have spoken about this problem, because this is how Ellen Ash Peters and Philip Blumberg met. The famous story that she needed a date for the governor's ball, and they ended up getting married. So without me knowing about any of this, they're like interviewing people downtown. And they said, we're happy to report we've spoken to Ralph. Tyler, was it Tyler? Yeah. And Ralph would be honored to escort you if you need a date for like the governor's ball. By the way, I don't think there was a governor's ball any of the time that I was here. If there was, I didn't know about it. And I mean, you could call that sexist because they had a little misunderstanding, right? But it wasn't, it didn't hurt my feelings. And I said to them, I could go to a ball, tiara and all, by myself. It's really okay, guys. And the next time I saw Ralph, I was like so embarrassed because I know that he's had this little group visit him and say, would you escort the dean if she needs an escort? And we became very, very, very good friends. He was a lovely man. So that was like the worst it got. It was like drinking delicious water after being parched, because being a woman had been an issue in my various law schools, and I was the first woman tenured and all of this. And here I came here where that was like the worst thing that happened, and it was absolutely charming and delightful.
That's wonderful to hear, Nell. Before I turn to Tim and Jeremy for their reflections on the importance of diversity in leadership, particularly dean leadership, I would like to acknowledge one of our former deans who's not here because she's out of town, and that is former interim dean Willa Jean McLean. So as I'm sure you all know, Willa Jean served as interim dean of the law school from 2012 to 2013. She was the first African-American female interim dean of the law school. And she asked that I mention on her behalf that serving as interim dean was one of the most rewarding highlights of her tenure at the University of Connecticut School of Law, and she remains profoundly grateful for having had that experience. And I am profoundly grateful to Nell and to Willa Jean, on whose shoulders I stand, for paving the way for a person of color, for an African American, for a female dean of the law school. So our thanks to Nell and to Willa Jean. Tim, your reflections on diversity in deanship leadership at law schools.
Sure. Well, we have much to be proud of. As Kent mentioned, one of our first graduates, Agnes Burns, was a woman. Her portrait is actually, her photograph is at the front here, below Carolyn Lillard, who was the co-founder. And women were part of this institution as students from the very start. But somewhat shamefully, we were slow on the faculty side, and especially slow on the leadership. And that's a fact of the history, and it's time to play catch up. And the same with regard to people of color. We did include students, African American students and Hispanic students over the years, but it really was only in recent years that we began to do better at that, and we're still not done well enough. But I'm proud of that tradition. For me, it was wonderful to come here and have a faculty that was quite evenly divided in terms of gender. I was also extremely lucky to be married to Dina, who had been a student here, but also was a great advisor about what the experiences are like when you are not necessarily viewed as part of the leadership class, so to speak. And I'm incredibly grateful for that, and all the other forms of support that I got over the years that I was here, and before and after.
Thank you, Tim. Jeremy.
So I'm also grateful to Willa Jean, who succeeded me 9 hours after I left, and I was happy to leave the place in fantastic hands. I see it still is, which I'm delighted to see. I think, your question about diversity, this is really the mission of our generation. If we can't succeed in building a diverse community in which not everyone is included, but everyone participates and has a say over what happens, the country's not going to make it. And it's a very challenging mission, and it's a noble one. And I'm glad to see Connecticut participating in it. We are trying to do the same thing at Northeastern. It's so important. It's going to turn out to put other things that we also think are important on the back burner, because we can't change everything all at once. But we got to do it. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Jeremy. Couldn't agree more. So as we know, it's not all roses on a daily basis. That we, as deans, we do face certain challenges. And so I wondered if you'd share, I'll come back to you, Jeremy, starting with you, maybe share a challenge that you had to face and overcome during your deanship.
Well, I like the overcome part. So
Yes,
right?
Yes, we do overcome.
So, I mean, there's no question that during my time, there were many challenges. but two in particular that struck everybody in the community. And they're going to seem silly in light of the importance of things like diversity, but nonetheless, they really matter to people. So one of them was, in my first year, as you all know, we have a wonderful evening program. And for most of the history of the U.S. News and World Report rankings, the entering statistics of the evening students didn't count, which was totally appropriate because people who are out of school for a long time tend not to test as well, has no bearing whatsoever on their abilities. It's just how it is. But in the first year I was dean, the U.S. News decided, for reasons I won't get into, they were going to start counting them. And that change in methodology knocked the school out of the top 50. And people were scared. I was not scared. That was a problem, because people could tell that I wasn't scared, and they wanted me to be more scared. So we had to work on that. We did a lot of things, and I echo what Tim said about Hugh Mcgill and George Shatsky before him and Philip before him, that we had a great culture. And Mark Janis always says this, that the two highlights of the school have been the faculty investments and the campus, the facilities. And I thought that was a good strategy. I was perfectly happy to try to continue it. I was interested in branding, so I came up with small classes, big ideas. That was the brand that I came up with. But I couldn't really solve this problem because of the second problem. And the second problem was that law school admissions at private universities were changing rapidly. And in particular, discounting, meaning giving generous financial aid packages to students at private schools, which had never done this before, was a threat to our competitive advantage. For most of our history, very strong students from Connecticut, this is the place they wanted to go. They got a great deal. They got a fantastic education. But now all of a sudden they had lots of options. And we didn't have adequate scholarship money. And so, and it was a recession. The state wasn't necessarily eager to give us money. So we temporarily, and I would stress temporarily, struggled. We solved a lot of problems. We made the faculty better. We built new classrooms. Things happened that were good, but we didn't. And I kept telling people, so some people want to kill the evening division. I was totally against that. We didn't do that, which is great because it's still thriving. And I kept saying, just wait, right? Because at the end of the day, reality will, appearance will catch up to reality. As long as the place is better. Now, the fact is, it's hard to get appearances to catch up to reality, and we tried as best as we could. We'll talk about that a little more later, but I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for that. We could probably spend the whole evening talking about U.S. News as a challenge for deans and for the academy, if I'm being honest, and particularly with regards to diversity and so many other things about it. But I thank you, and I appreciate you talking about that as one of the challenges that you experienced. What about you, Tim?
Well, when I arrived, there were two issues really facing the school that were quite salient. First was picking up on what Jeremy was saying. The national trend in law school enrollment was dropping rapidly. This was 2013. It was a reaction to the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, and by the time it bottomed out a year or two later, there were the same number of first-year students in law schools in the United States as there had been in 1976, which meant that all the law schools and that have been built since and space added since were empty seats. And so the competition for students was crazy and somewhat chaotic. Dealing with that and also with the employment fallout from the recession was just a really challenging time at the start of my deanship. The other challenge was building bridges between the law school and the external communities. And we are so fortunate being the state university law school that our employer community is also our alumni community, which is also our donor community. And so to be able to build those bridges was going to be really important. So I would say those were the main things. There was another thing that I didn't recognize at first, and that was in my 7 years as dean, I reported to 5 different provosts, and each provost had a different conception of what the law school should be or what the reporting relationship would be, and so constantly adjusting to those and trying to keep folks here calm was a challenge and worked out okay in the end.
Yes, thank you so much, Tim. Nell?
Well, I would echo, got out before everything really hit, but it was really during my tenure here that I began to realize the hold that the rankings had. They've been around since the late 80s, but people didn't really pay as much attention to them. And all of a sudden, it was getting to this point of where you were ranked was like the most important thing. And so that was, I mean, while I was here, it was before they changed the rating for evening division, and so we had we were in the top 50, but it doesn't matter. I did a site visit to Columbia Law School once, and the dean said, our alums are so upset because we're only 6. We need to be 4. So that I think they just affected everything and really warped things in a very, very bad way. For me, I think one of the biggest challenges was the day that I found out, despite the fact that Darcy and her people had been telling us for ages, this beautiful law library leaks, and it wasn't constructed very well, and of course it looks really beautiful. And then one day I find out that there's really nothing holding the facing up except gravity. And so I'm going, oh my God. And believe me, when we really got into it with the lawyers, there are things I can say and things I can't say. It was a disaster. So what I decided to do was to throw up the scaffolding and have a press, and tell the press. So I don't know if it's still around on the internet anywhere, but it was like a cold night. I think the rain was falling, and they're interviewing me, standing in front of the scaffolding, saying that a high wind, piece of the facing could blow off and hit one of our beloved students, and that's why. Plus, I was doing it to shame the university. We have to get this fixed. And was it fixed when you were dean, or was it fixed when Tim was dean? It took forever to get it fixed. Huh? 2012. So you had a lot to do with it. So that was tough because it just was one of the spaces that we were just so proud of. And apparently every contractor who touched this thing did something terrible. So I think it cost the same amount to rebuild it as it did to build it in the beginning. So that was a challenge, but nothing like what these two guys faced.
Well, I will say, although no one's asking me the question, I will add that, of course, the greatest challenge I think that I faced and still facing is, of course, the pandemic. Starting when I think here in Connecticut, here in Hartford, the weekend before everything closed down. I had the offer, I was entertaining the offer, and so my family and I came up that weekend right before everything shut down. And of course, we didn't know at that time what all it was going to mean. So coming into a first deanship during a pandemic, one could imagine quite different than what I expected, although people ask me, how's it been? I said, well, I have nothing to compare it to since this was my first one, so maybe every deanship is like this. But I will say, although we are still in the midst of it, the supportive, just helpful, committed community that we have with our faculty, our staff, our students, our alumni, members of the board, the university, the leadership of the university, and really throughout the state has really helped us to navigate these challenging waters in the best way that we can. We continue to provide a wonderful, safe educational experience for our students. We have continued to have an intellectually enriching environment for our faculty and for our community. And we continue to be there for our community in so many ways, whether that's through our clinics, through our experiential offerings of field placements, through our volunteer work. And so although, yes, challenging, we have really stepped up. And when I say we, I mean the family that is UConn Law and the family that is UConn as we continue to navigate. But every decision, you have to think about it in so many different ways because of the pandemic. So again, challenging, yet able to be overcome thanks to the wonderful community that we have. And so, of course, as we experience these challenges as dean, we do learn about ourselves, whether that's resilience that we didn't realize we had, or other lessons and other things that we learn about ourselves. And so if you would like to share, please, some of the lessons or some of the things that you've learned about yourselves from your time as dean. Tim, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, you said resilience. So I would say patience and resilience and how crucial that is. And I'll explain what my path was. Having come from being a litigator, my world was very simple. There were the team on my side, and then there was the team on the other side, and we know what we thought about them, and we knew what they thought about us. It was all very clear. And I arrived here, and I remarked to a few people, "Oh, this is so great. Everybody's on the same side." Well, everybody has a different conception of what our side is. And so what I realized, and I came to understand, was the profound difference between a command structure of decision-making and a collaborative structure of decision-making. And I'm sure some people in this room who still feel like there was some command, and I apologize for that. What I came to realize was that for an organization like this to work well, where you need everybody to be contributing in their own ways, with their own skills, you really need to talk new ideas through tremendously, and you need to understand, and you cannot make a good decision without understanding how it will operate from the perspective of every single person who's going to be part of the effort. And what that means is that you might have a really good idea, but it's not the good idea that you think it is, or the right idea, until you learn a lot more about how folks are going to experience it. And that does take patience, and it does take resilience in being able to say, okay, what I thought was going to work is not going to work. I got to keep having the energy and the hope to push ideas forward until, with the help of everybody, it takes a form that could actually fit the institution.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that. Jeremy, what do you think?
So this is one of those questions I think I'm not particularly interested in myself. So the idea of like what I learned, or how about myself, I would say that the single most surprising thing for me was, as someone who was really interested in being a dean from the very beginning, I paid a lot of attention as a faculty member to pretty much everything that was happening at every school that I was ever at. Carol Weisbach used to joke with me, we should just get you a couch to live in the conference room, because you're at every committee meeting everywhere all the time. And so I tended to believe that everyone was like that, and that therefore I could spend a lot more time communicating with the external community. I spent a lot of time at stores. I'm sure you are doing that as well. A lot of time meeting alums, on the theory that everybody on the campus pretty much knew everything that was happening, because I was telling them, right? But I was only telling them once. And I had one of our wonderful faculty colleagues visited me in Boston, and she came to me and she said, just for your own information, that she said, I was often very nervous about what's happening at the school. And I would call you on the phone and I would say to you, why aren't we doing anything about X, Y, Z? And she said, every time I called you, you were already doing all the things I had thought of and 5 more things. I just didn't know it, right? She said, but I called you, so I found out, and that reassured me. But other people didn't call you, and they didn't know, and so, as a lesson, because I ended up being dean in another place, that was a big lesson that I took, was that even if you've told people something, you got to tell them a lot of times. And so that was a lesson I learned. It isn't really about me, but it's still.
No, it's a great lesson. It's a great lesson, absolutely. Nell?
I learned all of those lessons, definitely. I think the overall one is, just how incredibly important it is to understand the culture, to respect the culture of the school, to learn about the culture, not try to just change the culture, but work within the culture. And this was a place that was sort of, the closest to true consensus of any place that I've ever been. And it puzzled me at first. Why aren't people debating at the faculty meeting? No, we don't do that. Everybody walks the halls and they talk to one another, and then they'll report into the dean and they'll say, well, Carol Weisbach isn't sure she could support this, and so somebody else is going to go talk to her. And then and I just had to learn to just it might be something that was important to me. I was hoping they decide what I suggested. They decide, to agree with me. And I just had to, just hang in there. And then, somebody come back and say, well, Carol's still not happy. I'm just using Carol as an example. She wasn't the only one. but just shows what respect people had for her. But she's not going to object to it. Then you go into the meeting, and of course new faculty were always amazed by this too. Somebody would present whatever it was, and there would be like no discussion and a unanimous vote. So every school is very different, and understanding that culture and giving it space. I mean, you could be in a place that has a dysfunctional culture, that happens, but that certainly wasn't UConn when I came here. And I think I learned a lot about being a good dean by what I learned being here. And I do just want to say something. I'll just start crying if I say too much. Philip and Hugh meant so much to me. And I think I've been at enough law schools now that I can say the former dean, usually the former dean either disappears, goes away or disappears, so they're not going to be in the way of the new dean, or they're in the background meddling, which is the worst, and that does happen. Here, they did not disappear. They would come and tell me what they thought, but it would always be in like the right way. Of course, Philip would just march in and, Dean, and this is a very important moment. And then he'd say, but you're the dean, and whatever you decide, I will respect you. And that was right. And Hugh had his own way, including, showing up at my house once in the middle of a snowstorm, saying he just happened to be in the neighborhood. But really, he was just really, really worried about appointments, and he loved the school so much, and he was wondering if we'd really thought about this and thought about that. But never, ever, ever meddling in the background, coming and helping me be as good as I can be, and I just treasure that forever.
That's wonderful to hear, Nell, and I'll use it as a moment, first of all, to say that we will be leaving time for questions and answers, both from our virtual audience as well as our live audience. So if you have questions or thinking of questions, please know that we will save time for that. But I would like to, if I could do a shout out to Tim, because Tim was just so incredibly helpful in my transition as a new dean and as an outgoing dean. All of the conversations, the meetings in the backyard, the wonderful dossier that he provided to me, giving me wonderful information and history about the law school and the workings of the law school as well as the university, which I refer to often. And not every dean, does that. And not every dean will be that gracious with their time and with their expertise and with their knowledge. And so I want to thank you publicly, Tim, for that, and to Nell and Jeremy, both of whom have been willing to be great mentors and of great assistance to me. And so I thank them for that. In our last few minutes that we have, kind of turning now, looking forward a little bit as we have looked back, what are your thoughts about the future of legal education and the profession? We know, again, it's always changing, it's always developing, but of course the pandemic in some ways have made us change and develop even more, along with some of the other things going on in our society and our world. So I would love to hear your thoughts about that, perhaps starting with you, Nell.
With me?
Yes.
Well, I mean, we are in, a turning point, but, and I've never been great about opining about the future because it has a way of coming back and biting me. We're going to all be virtual. Well, I don't know. I think we've learned how to be virtual when we need to be, and I think we'll be using more, we'll have a wonderful speaker Zoom into our class and do some other things that we may not have thought of before. But as to the big changes, I'm still not really sure, I'm not really sure what to predict. I've never been a futurist in that way, so I'm not a great person to talk to. Certainly legal education is becoming more practical, but that started a long time ago. It started with us when we started our wonderful clinic. So I'm probably not the person to paint the future.
Jeremy, your thoughts?
So it's always easy to predict change. I was telling Pat McCoy this earlier today. When I first got to Connecticut in 1989, there basically were two stories I heard about the area that the campus is located. One story was, this place is going to really sink because it's close to dangerous neighborhoods, and there's no money, and whatever. And in 10 years, the place is going to look terrible, it's going to be awful. And the other story was, this place is ready to take off. And in 10, 15 years, there's going to be fancy cafes and all kinds of, new luxury buildings. And of course, 30 years later, it's still exactly the same as it was. So,
We do have the cafe.
but I mean, it does seem as though there are several things that are clearly going to happen. One of them we talked about already, which has to be more diverse. It will become more international. We will need to teach a much broader array of skills in law schools. Artificial intelligence will take over some aspects of what lawyers now do. We will be wise to teach quantitative methods. We will be wise to teach design thinking, not just problems from the back end, but problems from the front end. We'll be wise to teach more systems thinking. And in order to do all those new things, we're going to have to figure out how to take the things we're already doing and do them more quickly and in more efficient ways, which I think all of those things will happen, assuming, and I hate to be a downer here, but assuming that we are able to stave off the current threat to the entire rule of law democratic structure, which I urge everyone to spend as much time as you can trying to fix that, because otherwise none of this will happen.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Tim?
Well, I agree completely with that. What I'd add is that I've seen over the last decade a flipping back and forth of the supply and demand balance with regard to legal talent. That is to say, in the early 2000s, employers couldn't find enough lawyers to hire, and then it crashed, and in the mid-teens, so many of our grads had trouble finding a job, and now it's flipping back. And when I think about this, what I am anticipating, and the trend I'm thinking is that population growth is slowing, but change is accelerating, and lawyers are the people that are looked to adjust the rules of society during times of change. Change is a very pro-lawyer dynamic. And if that's true, then what I would like to see is that law schools see themselves less as the institutions that screen out and find the best talent to make it available to employers, and instead focus more on finding what the talent is in every one of our students, that every student is essential and every student has a gift. We need to find out what that is and help them develop it. And if that's true, then I think it has an effect on the way we teach and especially on the way we test. And having more testing be interactive, which means it's expensive because it takes a lot of faculty time. But that is what makes legal education in America better than anywhere in the world. It's what makes foreign students want to come here, much more than American students want to go to law schools elsewhere in the world. That is our great gift, and that is the great thing about legal education in the United States, and I would like to see it go in that direction.
Thank you so much, Tim, for those thoughts. The last question I'll pose before opening it up to the audience for questions is just generally your reflections on the law school centennial and the wishes that you have for the law school for the next centennial as it embarks on continuing to grow and continuing to build upon the great legacy of excellence that we have here at UConn Law. I'll kind of go down the road this way. Tim?
Well, I mentioned that one of the things that attracted to me this job originally was the mission. And there's a part of the mission that I want to focus on that was there at the very start in 1921, as Kent mentioned, and that is that this is an institution that promotes social mobility. It has always been, especially as a public school, a place that welcomes first-generation students and makes it possible for people who weren't going to really have a chance at a powerful career to have a chance at a powerful career. And that is so essential to America, and our ability to continue doing that for another 100 years and after that as well is just tremendously important to me.
Absolutely, Tim. Thank you. Nell?
I've got to agree with Tim. That's what I love about this place. You know, we're not charging $65,000 a year and then giving it all away in fellowships to only people who had everything given to them, so they test super well.
You may want to speak up just a little bit now.
What's
Maybe
that?
hold the microphone. Yeah, just a little bit closer.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what I love and have always loved about UConn. It's a very special place.
Couldn't agree more. Jeremy?
So I hope everybody appreciates that this law school is extraordinarily strong and stable, which in the current system of higher education is rare. And so you don't need to worry about all the things that Tim and Nell have mentioned, which are great. You have the freedom to take some bets. And what I mean by that is pick some areas that are, and I see you're already doing that, and you do with Tim as well. I think that's great. And really invest heavily in educational reform, certain subject areas, different styles, because every school is going to need a brand. I hate to use such a commercial word, and you really have the luxury to be able to do that. So what I hope for the law school is continued experimentation, continued risk-taking, and continued commitment, because that's what I think is going to make the place even better than it's already been.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Great thoughts. So with that, happy to entertain any questions that anyone may have. We have our wonderful Deb King, who will have a microphone for any questions that anyone may have. Or virtually, if there's any of our virtual guests who have a question. We can be Socratic and call on someone. Yes, Nancy. Why did I want to be dean? You know, I will tell you, kind of going back a little bit to what Tim was just saying, it's really, for me, it was the values that I saw in the position description. It was the values, two in particular, of accessibility and affordability, because those are values that are very core to my being. Had it not been for people providing financial assistance and opportunities for education for me, I wouldn't be sitting in this seat today. And so when I read about and learned about UConn Law, that accessibility and affordability mission, again, from the part-time evening program, started on October 25th, 1921, till today, I feel like we really do value that and we further that. And so that really aligned with, with kind of my core values. And also the community of Hartford. I'm originally from South Carolina, from a very diverse, diverse neighborhood and diverse city. And the fact that we're situated here in Hartford with so diverse, so multicultural. We have the West End neighborhood, we have the downtown neighborhoods, we have North End, we have South End, such wonderful communities here in Hartford and also the surrounding communities, that I knew that as a public flagship law school, we could not just be in the community, but we could be of the community, and UConn Law was already doing that, and continuing to further that mission was something that attracted me here. And of course, even on a rainy day, as I came through for my interview, the warmth that I felt from everyone that I met throughout the process made it feel like home even then. And so that's kind of why I wanted to be here. And it has been the honor of my professional career to lead this wonderful law school. Hear, hear. Other questions? All right, well, not seeing any, and if no one wants to be Socratic and call on anyone, we can start to bring the evening to a close. I did want to mention to everyone that tomorrow at 11 a.m., we will be honoring the life and legacy and wonderful contributions of Dean Philip Blumberg. And so it's tomorrow here at 11 here in the reading room, but it's also virtual. And so if you would like to attend that virtually, please feel free to go on our website, www.law.uconn.edu, and get the information of how to attend virtually. But we are very much looking forward to honoring Philip in that way and be with his family. And so I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Of course, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Nell. Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, Kent, for your wonderful remarks this evening. Also want to thank the Centennial Committee and Deb King, Allison Swain, Chris Shook, the communications and IT departments, our facilities and BME departments, as well as our interpreters for helping us to plan and facilitate this wonderful conversation. It has been such a wonderful pleasure being with you all today. Before we completely conclude, I invite our board president of the Alumni Association, Jim Rule, for final remarks.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Rule. I'm the president of the Alumni Association this year for the law school. And just before we all leave, I want to please lead us all in a round of applause for this presentation. And for each of the deans, we have some tokens of our appreciation from the alumni, which we're going to be handing
Say
out.
it's a thankless job.
And, you know, here in the 100th year of the law school, this is just a time to be reminded of what a special place this is, especially given what everyone in society has been through over the past couple of years. And thank you so much for those of you who are here in person to make this event even more special. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.